Right now, your mind may be turning over a single sentence that someone said to you hours ago, looking at it from different angles, and searching for a hidden meaning that probably was never there. Perhaps you are lying in bed, but your thoughts are busy rebuilding yesterday, or anxiously rehearsing a conversation that has not even happened yet. You might feel a heavy, dull ache behind your eyes, a sign that your mind has been working overtime without your permission, spinning its wheels in the dark while the rest of the world rests. It is deeply exhausting to live inside a house that refuses to fall silent, especially when you are the one keeping the lights on against your own will. Maybe you came here tonight simply because you want the noise to stop, even for just an hour. Let yourself notice the actual room around you, right now, letting your awareness drift away from the thoughts and toward the physical space you occupy. Feel the cool air of the night as it touches the exposed skin of your face, a sharp contrast to the warmth building beneath your heavy quilt. Listen to the faint, low hum of the distant world outside your window, a quiet reminder that life is moving on without requiring your supervision. Notice the specific texture of the fabric beneath your hands, the solid support of the mattress under your spine, and the way your shoulders naturally sink half an inch lower when you finally stop trying to hold yourself up. You have arrived at the edge of the day, and the door to tomorrow is not yet open. You are not broken, and this heavy accumulation of thoughts is not a sign that you have failed at finding peace. The mind that worries is often just a mind that cares deeply, but it has lost its way in the dark. Tonight, we are not going to fight your thoughts. We are not going to force your mind into a sudden artificial silence, and we will not demand that you fix your life before you are allowed to sleep. Instead, we are simply going to change how we sit with the noise. There is a profound insight in the Buddhist tradition that can change the way you view this mental fatigue. The mind does not become still because you successfully defeat or erase your thoughts. True stillness arrives only when you realize that a thought is merely a passing internal event, not an absolute reality that you are required to obey. Overthinking is not a sign of wisdom, but rather it is fear masquerading as protection, a habit of the heart that mistakenly believes if it analyzes a problem 1,000 times, it can somehow control the outcome. Think of your mind right now as a heavy bronze temple bell that has been struck hard by the events of your day. The person who spoke to you, the mistake you made, or the deadline you fear, that was the initial strike of the iron clapper against the metal. That moment happened, and it is already gone. Yet, when you lie awake replaying it, you are listening to the vibration that follows the blow. The strike is over, but the bronze is still shaking, sending out wave after wave of resonant sound into the night. Your exhaustion does not come from the original event itself, but from the fact that you are trying to catch those vibrating sound waves with your bare hands, trying to force the metal to stop shaking through sheer willpower. We often forget that the vibration is just residual energy, a natural law of metal and sound. It does not mean the bell is ruined, and it does not mean the noise will last forever. It simply means a resonance is working its way through the structure, and it needs time to fade. If you fight the echo, if you get angry at the bell for ringing, you only create more friction, hitting the metal once again with your own judgment and starting a whole new cycle of noise. Tonight, you do not have to solve a single problem. You do not have to resolve your doubts, and you do not have to quiet the echo before you are permitted to rest. We are going to let the resonance take care of itself. We are going to let the sound run its course while we sit quietly in the space around it. In a moment, our journey will take us to an ancient lowland foundry, a place of cold stone and molten metal, where a young apprentice first discovered the secret of this inner vibration through an unexpected, silent touch. But before we travel there, let yourself take one slow, deliberate breath, drawing the cool night air deep into your chest and letting it out with a long, unhurried sigh, allowing the resonance of your day to vibrate without your interference. To understand how this heavy mental resonance can finally dissolve, we must travel back in time to a quiet valley hidden away in the damp lowlands. In this valley stood an old stone foundry, a place where the air always smelled of charcoal smoke, wet earth, and the sharp metallic tang of cold bronze. It was here that a young apprentice named Joran spent his days learning the difficult art of shaping metal. Joran was a young man of intense focus, but his mind carried a heavy burden. He possessed an intellect that never seemed to rest, a mind that constantly analyzed every mistake he made during the day and worried endlessly about the tasks of the tomorrow. At night, while the other artisans slept soundly on their straw mats, Joran would lie awake for hours, his head filled with a persistent, exhausting noise. The foundry was filled with dozens of bells, large and small, hanging from timber beams or resting on the damp limestone floor for Joran. These objects were no longer beautiful instruments of music, but sources of deep torment. Every time a heavy iron clapper struck a bronze rim, the initial sound would slice through the air, sharp and clear. But long after the physical impact had ended, the sound would linger inside Joran's ears, transforming into a low, throbbing hum that followed him into his quarters. He began to believe that the workshop was cursed, or that the metal itself possessed a malicious spirit that refused to allow his spirit to find rest. His days became a haze of exhaustion, and his hands began to shake as he poured the molten metal into the clay molds. The master of this foundry was an elderly nun named Sister Mayashin. She was a woman of immense silence, her face lined with decades of working beside the intense heat of the furnace. She walked with slow, deliberate steps across the soot-stained workshop, her long gray robes brushing against the cold stone floor. Mayashin had watched the young apprentice for many weeks, noting the dark circles beneath his eyes and the tense, defensive way he held his shoulders. She knew the weight that Joran was carrying, even though he had never spoken a word about his sleepless nights. Wisdom does not always speak in long explanations, and Mayashin preferred to let the physical materials of the world reveal the truths that words could not quite reach. One cold evening, as the heavy oil lamps were being lit around the stone foundry, Joran finally broke down from his fatigue. He walked up to the old nun, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. He told her that he could no longer endure the noise of the workshop, and that the continuous ringing inside his skull was driving him mad. He begged her to let him forge a special bell, a unique instrument made from an alloy so soft that it would make no sound at all when struck. He believed that if he could just create an object of absolute silence, his own mind would finally find a way to mirror that quietness. Sister Mayashin did not offer words of sympathy, nor did she tell him that his desire was foolish. Instead, she reached into the deep sleeve of her gray robe and pulled out a small, chipped bronze handbell. This bell was old, its surface dark with age, and its iron clapper hung loosely inside the metallic skirt, completely unpadded. She placed the heavy handle of the small bell directly into Joran's cold palm, and the young man felt the unexpected weight of the metal, a cold object that seemed to absorb the ambient chill of the stone room. At this point, the apprentice assumed that his teacher was about to give him a simple lecture on patience. But the old nun was preparing to show him something much deeper. She gestured for him to hold the handbell at chest level. Right between them in the dim light of the oil lamp, Joran held his breath, his whole body bracing for the sharp noise he knew was coming. Mayashin reached out with a small iron rod, and with a swift, firm movement, she struck the outer rim of the chipped bronze bell. The sound erupted between them, a high, piercing note that echoed sharply off the low stone ceiling and seemed to vibrate directly through Joran's jawbone. It was the exact sound he hated, the precise frequency that usually triggered his long hours of late-night overthinking. Instinctively, Joran did what he always did when the world became too loud. He squeezed his eyes shut, locked his teeth together, and tried to use his own internal willpower to ignore the noise, screaming inside his own mind for the sound to stop. He believed that if he fought hard enough against the echo, he could force it out of his awareness. But his internal resistance only made the vibration feel more intense, as if the sound waves were bouncing wildly against the walls of his skull, growing louder and more agonizing with every second he fought them. The sound seemed to expand, filling every corner of his exhausted consciousness. Seeing his struggle, Sister Mayashin did not tell him to calm down, and she did not ask him to meditate. Instead, she reached out with her bare hand, a hand rough from years of handling coal and molten bronze, and she placed her palm flat against the outer surface of the vibrating bell. She did not grab it tightly, and she did not shake it. She simply pressed her skin firmly against the shaking metal. Instantly, the piercing sound stopped dead in the air. The high, exhausting note vanished, replaced by an immediate, profound silence that rushed into the small stone room like cool water. Joran opened his eyes in surprise, his chest heaving as he looked down at the old nun's hand. He expected the metal to feel cold and hostile, but when he looked closer, he realized what had actually happened. The physical vibration of the bronze had not disappeared into nothingness. Instead, the energy of the strike had moved through Myashin's calm palm, transforming the sharp, loud resonance into a gentle, harmless warmth that now rested quietly against her skin. The old nun looked up into Joran's tired eyes. Her face completely relaxed in the soft glow of the oil lamp. She asked him a simple question, wanting to know if it was the bell that had caused his suffering, or if it was his own refusal to touch the vibration that kept the noise alive inside his mind. In that quiet moment, standing on the damp limestone floor with the cold night wind whistling through the cracks of the wooden foundry doors, Joran felt a sudden wave of emotional recognition. He looked at the chipped bronze handbell, and for the first time in his life, he did not see an enemy. He saw an exact reflection of his own exhausted heart. He realized that all this time, he had been trying to find peace by running away from the echoes of his life, or by violently screaming over the noise inside his head. He had been trying to build a mind that could never be struck, a life where no mistakes were made, and no difficult words were ever spoken. But the foundry had just shown him that the strike is a natural part of living in a world of metal and stone. The problem was not the initial blow, but the way he allowed the vibration to bounce around his mind without ever allowing his awareness to step forward and hold it still. As the silence deepened in the old workshop, Joran felt the tight muscles in his neck begin to loosen, just a little bit. For the first time in months, the memory of the loud note was still present, but the actual shaking had stopped. He stood there in the quiet space left behind by the sound, realizing that the stillness he had been chasing was never hidden in a fictional bell of absolute silence. The stillness was already right there, waiting in the room, the very moment the hand stopped fighting the vibration and simply allowed it to rest. This old story of the foundry is not telling us to stop feeling the events of our lives, and it is certainly not asking us to become cold, unfeeling blocks of wood or stone. Buddhist wisdom never asks you to shut down your human heart, nor does it suggest that the initial pain of living can be entirely avoided. When someone treats you unfairly, when an unexpected crisis hits your home, or when a sudden wave of anxiety grips your chest, that is a real event. It is a physical blow to the bell of your life, and it is entirely natural for that blow to make a sound. The mistake we make, the hidden trap that wears us out, is believing that we must spend the rest of the night arguing with the sound waves that follow. The core insight of the Buddha points toward a very simple, liberating truth about the architecture of human suffering. There is a profound difference between the initial impact of life and the secondary resonance that we create inside our own minds. The first pain is often unavoidable, but the second pain, the long throbbing hum of overthinking, is something we are actively, unconsciously generating. When you lie awake at midnight replaying a difficult moment over and over, you are no longer dealing with the actual event. The person who hurt you is likely asleep. The hour has passed, and the room around you is empty. You are dealing entirely with an internal echo, a ghost of a sound that you are keeping alive by constantly feeding it your attention. In our modern lives, we often confuse this mental spinning with a form of intelligence or responsibility. We tell ourselves that if we just analyze our fears long enough, if we just worry about every possible disaster, we will somehow protect ourselves from future pain. But this is the ultimate illusion of the overthinking mind. This desperate mental grip is what traditional teachings refer to as attachment, which is not a beautiful form of love, but a tight, fearful demand that reality must conform to our exact wishes before we are allowed to feel safe. We grip the handle of our fears so tightly that our fingers bleed, and then we wonder why our hands hurt so badly. When we look at this fatigue through the lens of compassion, we begin to realize that our overthinking is actually a misplaced form of self-care. It is a wounded part of you trying its best to keep you safe in an uncertain world. But just like Joran trying to scream over the noise of the foundry, your internal fighting only adds a second wound to the first one. Every time you judge yourself for overthinking, every time you get frustrated because your mind refuses to go blank, you are simply striking the bronze bell a second time. You are creating a brand new wave of vibration, a fresh layer of mental noise that ensures the ringing will continue for hours to come. Mindfulness, when translated into the language of gentle emotional healing, is nothing more than the quiet palm of Sister Maya's shin resting lightly against the shaking bronze. It is the brave, soft willingness to step forward and touch the vibration of your life without judging it, without trying to change it, and without trying to force it to be quiet. It is the capacity to sit in the dark room of your mind and say to a heavy thought, "I see you. I feel how much you are shaking right now, but I do not have to follow you into the dark. You are allowed to be here, and you are also allowed to fade." True letting go does not mean you force yourself to forget your past, and it does not mean you pretend your anxieties do not exist. It simply means you release the extra struggle, the unnecessary friction of trying to push the echo out of the room. When you stop fighting the resonance, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mental energy that was previously bound up in the exhausting work of resistance begins to drop downward, moving from the sharp, noisy corners of your intellect into the vast, open space of your deeper awareness. The thought ceases to be an absolute command that you must obey, and it becomes what it was always meant to be, a temporary internal event that is already on its way out. In a moment, this old foundry wisdom will come much closer to your own body, transforming from an old story into a simple internal practice that you can use right here in your bed. But before we explore that shift, let yourself notice how much space already exists around the noise in your mind. The thoughts may still be vibrating. The echo of your day may still be humming quietly in the background. But you do not have to be the one keeping it alive. You can simply allow the bronze to cool at its own pace, recognizing that the silence you are searching for is not a place where noise is forbidden, but the vast, patient sky that allows all sounds to rise and fall without ever losing its own deep peace. Now, if it feels right to you, let us bring this ancient foundry wisdom directly into the quiet space of your own bedroom. There is absolutely no need to sit up, there is no need to cross your legs, and you do not have to assume any formal posture of meditation. You can remain exactly as you are, lying down in the dark, resting your body against the mattress. Let your arms fall loosely by your sides, or place your palms gently upon your belly. Wherever they feel most comfortable and heavy, you are completely done with the demands of the daylight hours. And right now, nothing is required of you except the simple willingness to breathe. Take a slow, quiet breath in through your nose, letting the cool air fill the lower spaces of your lungs without any sense of rushing. Hold it for just a brief, comfortable moment, and then let the breath slip out through your parted lips, long and slow like a quiet sigh that carries the weight of the evening away. As you release the air, let your jaw soften, allowing a tiny space to form between your upper and lower teeth, releasing that tight hinge where we so often store the unspoken tension of our days. Let your forehead smooth out, imagining the skin relaxing from the center of your brow out to your temples, as if a cooling cloth were being laid gently across your mind. Perhaps you can feel the faint rhythmic movement of your chest as it rises and falls in the darkness, a steady, physical anchor that has been with you since the moment you were born. You do not need to alter this rhythm or make your breathing look a certain way. Just observe it, noticing how the body knows exactly how to care for itself without your deliberate supervision or control. As you rest in this rhythm, you might notice that a specific thought is trying to pull you away from the room, a memory of a difficult interaction, a mistake from this morning, or a looming obligation that waits for you tomorrow. If you notice a thought rising, there is no need to get angry with yourself, and you do not have to try to smash it into silence. That thought is just a vibration, a residual note humming within the structure of your mind, because your day happened to strike you quite hard. Instead of fighting it, try to name the pattern very softly in your mind, whispering to yourself, "There is the ringing," or "There is the echo." Just by naming it, you are stepping out of the sound wave and becoming the one who listens. Now, using the gentle power of your imagination, Visualize that you are holding that specific, noisy thought in your open hand. Picture it as a small vibrating object made of cold bronze, humming with all the anxiety and tension that has been keeping you awake. It is shaking against your skin, a restless piece of energy that feels sharp and intense. You might feel a subtle reflection of this shaking in your physical body, perhaps a slight tightness in your throat, a fluttering in your chest, or a knot in your stomach. This is the physical resonance of your overthinking. If it feels right, imagine taking your other hand and placing your palm flat against this vibrating bronze thought. Do not squeeze it, do not try to break it, and do not throw it away from you. Just let your awareness rest firmly and softly upon the surface of the vibration, exactly like the old nun placing her rough hand on the rim of the shaking bell. Meet the energy with absolute kindness, acknowledging that this thought is just trying to protect you, even if it is making a great deal of noise in the process. Say to it silently, I feel how much you are shaking, but the strike is already over, and we are safe enough to rest now. As you maintain this soft, imaginary touch, notice what happens to the mental picture. You might find that the intense, sharp frequency of the thought begins to slow down, losing its piercing edge. The frantic vibration slowly changes its character, softening into a low, dull hum, and then transforming into a gentle, harmless warmth that dissolves into the skin of your palm. The metal is cooling down because you have stopped hitting it with your resistance. The noise is running out of fuel because you are no longer feeding it your analytical attention. There is no pressure for this image to change immediately, and if your mind still feels loud, that is completely permitted. Even noticing the presence of the noise without hating yourself, for it is a profound form of practice. You are learning how to be the vast, quiet stone room that holds the bell, rather than the frantic apprentice trying to scream over the echo. You can return to this soft touch whenever you are ready, letting the breath gather your scattered pieces and bring them back to the mattress beneath you. Slowly, the teaching becomes deeply personal as you realize that you do not need to force your life into a state of perfect resolution before you are allowed to fall asleep. The problems of your life may still exist in the outside world, but right now, in this midnight room, they are just distant echoes that have no power to harm you unless you run after them. You can let the world shake outside your windows while you remain steady in the center of your own quiet awareness. As this initial resonance begins to cool in your chest, our journey goes deeper, moving away from the stone foundry of the lowlands and traveling toward a barren, arid landscape where the air is clear and the silence is even more profound. In a moment, we will visit a remote place where echoes are not feared, but held within a deep darkness, revealing an even greater secret about the space that lives beneath the noise. Years after his time at the lowland foundry, Joran traveled deep into a remote, arid territory where the earth was baked red by the sun and the horizon stretched out into vast, empty gravel plains. He was no longer a young apprentice, but an older traveler. Yet the old habit of his mind had not entirely disappeared. He had learned how to calm the sudden, loud impacts of life, but he still struggled with a deeper, more subtle form of mental exhaustion, the chronic tendency to look far ahead into the future and worry about whether he was truly safe. He found himself constantly plotting his journey miles in advance, calculating his water supply, and agonizing over the choices he had made along the road. His intellect remained a highly active machine, always searching for certainty in a landscape that offered none. In the middle of this sun-scorched wilderness stood an isolated desert well station, a solitary outpost built entirely of ancient, layered gray limestone. This station was managed by an elderly blind well-keeper named Sokan, a man whose skin had been turned to leather by the dry desert wind. Sokan lived in absolute simplicity, guided through his dark world by the deep sounds and tactile textures of the earth beneath his bare feet. The well itself was immense, a dark vertical shaft sunk incredibly deep into the subterranean bedrock, reaching down to a hidden icy water reserve that had sustained travelers for generations. Because of the vast depth and the hard stone walls, the well functioned as a massive natural acoustic chamber, capturing and magnifying every single vibration that occurred near its mouth. Joran arrived at the well station late one afternoon, his throat parched and his mind spinning with the anxieties of his long journey across the gravel plains. Sokan greeted him with a silent nod and pointed toward a heavy iron bucket attached to a thick hemp rope winding around a wooden windlass. Thirsty and impatient, Joran grabbed the iron bucket and swung it into the mouth of the well, letting the rope slip rapidly through his hands. But as the bucket descended into the darkness, it swung unevenly, crashing violently against the layered limestone walls. The impact produced a loud metallic clank that exploded out of the well's opening, hitting the dry air like a sudden clap of thunder. Instead of fading quickly, the sound began to bounce back and forth between the deep stone walls. The initial crash transformed into a complex, chaotic series of echoes, sounding like a furious, unceasing argument deep underground. Joran winced, his old sensitivity to noise flaring up instantly, his heart beating faster as the subterranean resonance filled his ears. Desperate to stop the noise, he pulled the rope up quickly, but his hasty movements only caused the bucket to slam against the stones again, adding new, harsher notes to the existing racket. The air inside the well station seemed to vibrate with a heavy, oppressive confusion that mirrored the exact state of Joran's frantic mind. The blind well-keeper sat quietly on a wooden bench nearby, his face completely unbothered by the din. He listened to Joran's ragged breathing and the wild clattering of the iron bucket. Sokan spoke softly, his voice cutting through the noise without any effort, asking the traveler why he was fighting the stone walls. Joran replied that he only wanted to draw water in peace, but the well seemed determined to mock him with its endless, terrifying noise. He explained that he was trying to drop the bucket perfectly straight to avoid making a sound, but the harder he tried to guide the rope with absolute precision, the more his hands shook, causing an even louder disaster with every attempt. Sokan stood up slowly, tapping his wooden staff against the limestone floor until he reached the edge of the dark opening. He took the hemp rope from Joran's white-knuckled fingers. The old man did not try to drop the bucket carefully, and he did not attempt to avoid the walls. He simply released the windlass, letting the iron bucket drop naturally, allowing it to bump and clank against the stones whenever the current of the descent dictated. The echoes erupted once more, a roaring cascade of metal meeting stone, vibrating up from the deep earth. But then the blind man did something that Joran did not expect. Instead of stepping back or covering his ears, Sokan leaned his upper body directly over the dark mouth of the well. He closed his eyes even tighter, turning his ear down into the center of the roaring echo chamber. He gestured for Joran to come closer and do the same, indicating that the young man should place his ear right beside his own, directly over the source of the chaotic sound. Joran hesitated, terrified that looking into the noise would only make his headache worse, but the old man's presence was unshakable. He leaned over the dark limestone rim, bracing himself for the assault on his senses. At first, all he could hear was the deafening confusion of the echoes, the chaotic residue of the iron bucket's descent bouncing relentlessly off the rock. He felt an intense urge to pull away, to run out into the quiet desert, to escape the inner tension that this noise was triggering deep within his chest. Sokan placed a gentle hand on Joran's shoulder, holding him steady above the darkness. The old man whispered into the wind, telling the traveler to stop tracking the notes of the echo, and to start listening strictly to the vast, cool space that was containing the sound. He told him to hear the silence that lived between the vibrations, the massive, unmoving dark architecture of the well that remained completely unchanged no matter how many times the iron bucket struck the walls. Joran took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain still, and shifted his attention. He stopped focusing on the loud metallic clanks and began to notice the profound subterranean emptiness that held those sounds. He realized that the echoes, no matter how loud or chaotic they seemed, were actually incredibly small compared to the immense ancient depth of the stone shaft. The well was not the noise. The well was the vast dark piece that allowed the noise to happen. The stone walls did not get hurt by the echo. They did not hold on to the sound, and they did not try to fix the vibration. They simply provided an open room for the sound to rise, bounce, and naturally die away. In that moment of focused listening, a subtle transformation occurred inside Joran's heart. He did not achieve a state of magical, flawless enlightenment. and his worries about his long journey did not instantly vanish into the desert air. But the way he held those worries changed entirely. He stopped trying to force his mind to be a flat, silent plane. He stopped gripping the rope of his life with that trembling, desperate need for a perfect descent. He allowed his chest to soften, letting his breath drop deep into his abdomen, sitting quietly right in the middle of the echo chamber without needing the echo to stop. When the iron bucket finally hit the deep water far below, a soft, muffled splash rose up through the shaft, followed by a long, slow deceleration of the sound waves. Joran looked down into the blackness, realizing that the pure, cold water at the very bottom of the well had remained completely undisturbed the entire time. The noise on the walls had never touched the clarity of the source. The frantic vibrations had never altered the nature of the water. He turned to Soken, his eyes clear and his shoulders dropped low. He did not say a word of thanks, because words felt too noisy in the beautiful quiet that was now settling over the desert outpost. He simply reached for the wooden windlass and began to turn it with a slow, steady discipline, accepting the occasional clank of the bucket against the limestone as a natural part of the work. He had stopped treating the echoes as an emergency, and within that single shift of perspective, the desert well station had transformed from a place of torment into a sacred sanctuary of rest. This profound shift in the desert well station opens a window into the complex psychological mechanisms that keep our modern minds in a state of constant, exhausting acceleration. When we examine the habit of overthinking through a lens of deep self-compassion, we begin to see that our mental spinning is rarely a random malfunction. It is a deeply ingrained survival strategy, an anxious attempt by the ego to construct a shield of absolute certainty in a world that is inherently unpredictable. We replay the past because we mistakenly believe that if we analyze our old missteps enough times, we can somehow undo the vulnerability we felt when they occurred. We rehearse the future because we secretly assume that if we can anticipate every potential disaster, we can prevent ourselves from ever being caught off guard or hurt again. Beneath this constant mental rehearsal lies a deeper, more painful pattern, which is the habit of turning our thoughts into our permanent identity. When a wave of anxiety hits us, we do not simply notice a passing vibration in the mind. Instead, we immediately wrap our sense of self around that vibration, telling ourselves a story that says, "I am an anxious person, I am fundamentally broken, or I am someone who can never find peace." We begin to use our own mental fatigue as a weapon of self-judgment, trying to force ourselves into a state of quietness through internal shame and harsh criticism. We treat our minds like a malfunctioning machine that needs to be aggressively repaired, forgetting that the very act of fighting the mind is what keeps the internal gears spinning at such a frantic, destructive speed. The great psychological insight of Buddhist wisdom is the clear distinction between the raw reality of life and the secondary suffering we superimpose upon it. Life, by its very nature, will occasionally bring moments of impact. There will be sharp words from others, unexpected losses, and periods of deep uncertainty that strike the outer surface of our lives. These occurrences are like the iron bucket hitting the stone walls of the well as it descends into the dark. That initial contact is real. It carries a legitimate weight, and it is entirely natural for it to produce a sharp resonance. But our actual suffering, the heavy, suffocating weight that keeps us awake at midnight, is not caused by the stone walls or the bucket. Our suffering is the way we stand at the top of the dark shaft, tracking every single echo, counting every vibration, and turning those transient noises into a permanent statement about who we are. We confuse the fleeting acoustic distortion with the deep, quiet stone that holds it. We assume that because the well is filled with a loud echo, the structure itself is collapsing, when in reality the layered limestone is perfectly solid, completely unhurt, and deeply anchored in the earth. Peace, therefore, does not arrive because we somehow manage to seal the mouth of the well so that nothing can ever fall out it again. True internal freedom comes from a radical, compassionate change in how we relate to the noise that is already bouncing around inside us. The Buddha did not teach a path of cold detachment or artificial numbness. He pointed toward a capacity within human awareness that is vast enough to let a thought vibrate without giving that thought the power to dictate our reality. You do not need to perform the impossible task of erasing your memories or silencing your anxieties tonight. You only need to discover that you are the vast, spacious depth of the well, not the frantic clatter of the bucket. When you stop treating every internal echo as an absolute emergency that must be solved before you are allowed to rest, the entire architecture of your mind undergoes a beautiful, quiet transformation. You begin to understand that an anxious thought is not a factual command. It is merely a temporary fluctuation of energy, a residual hum moving through the nervous system after a long day of encounters. By leaning over the edge of your own heart with an attitude of gentle curiosity, rather than defensive fear, you allow the vibration to exist without fighting it. You give the sound waves permission to run their natural course, knowing that no matter how loud the echo becomes, it can never alter the purity or the stillness of the water that waits at your deepest core. Slowly, this insight begins to shift your relationship with your own history and your own fears. You realize that you do not have to fix your entire personality or resolve every single dilemma in your life before you are permitted to close your eyes. You can leave the questions unanswered. You can leave the future unplotted. And you can allow your tired mind to hold its residual vibrations without your interference. As you let go of the trembling need for absolute control, the mental energy that was previously frozen in resistance begins to melt, sinking downward into a heavier, softer state of physical presence. Now, let this understanding bring you into a closer, more intimate relationship with the modern world you walk through every day. In a moment, we will see how this spacious way of holding our thoughts can protect us during the chaotic moments of our daily routine, transforming our ordinary, stressful interactions into opportunities for deep, unshakable stability. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life, moving out of the quiet stone stations of the desert and entering the actual architecture of your ordinary days. We do not practice this spacious awareness to escape from the modern world, but to learn how to walk through its constant demands without losing our own internal grounding. Think of how this mental exhaustion shows up for you on a random Tuesday afternoon. It is the sudden prick of anxiety you feel when you send an important message and find yourself checking your phone every 2 minutes, watching an empty screen, and building a mountain of worst-case scenarios out of a delayed reply. It is the heavy exhaustion of sitting in a meeting, smiling and nodding on the outside, while your inner intellect is frantically replaying an awkward comment you made an hour ago, turning it over until your spirit feels completely bruised. We live in a world that constantly encourages our internal bells to vibrate at a frantic, unnatural frequency. You might feel the persistent, quiet panic of comparing your progress to the visible lives of those around you, feeling a subtle shame that whispers you are somehow falling behind, or that you have not achieved enough to deserve your place on this earth. Perhaps you carry the burden of trying to manage the emotional states of everyone you love, pretending to be perfectly fine while your own internal resources are completely drained. You might crave a single hour of deep rest, yet the moment you lie down, a quiet guilt surfaces, telling you that your worth is tied exclusively to your productivity, and that resting without earning it is a form of weakness. But when we bring the lesson of the deep limestone well into these everyday micro moments, our relationship with the day shifts in a very practical, poetic way. You begin to understand that you do not need to prevent the modern world from striking your life. When a difficult email arrives, or when someone passes judgment on your work, that event is simply an iron bucket making direct contact with the stone. It happens. It causes a legitimate resonance within your nervous system. But instead of immediately jumping down into the darkness to chase that noise, you can choose to take a deliberate 3-second pause before you offer a single word or reaction. This short pause is the exact moment you choose to become the vast stone room rather than the chaotic vibration itself. You can look directly at a frantic, anxious thought as it rises in your mind and tell yourself, this is just the mind making a sound. But it is not a factual description of my reality. You can experience the intense physical sensation of fear or inadequacy without giving that feeling the authority to dictate your actions. If an awkward memory tries to pull you into a loop of late-night regret, you can gently place your awareness flat against that inner shaking. allowing the residual energy of the day to convert into a soft, quiet understanding that requires no further analysis. You can care deeply about your life, your relationships, and your responsibilities without gripping the outcomes so tightly that your spirit begins to break. Wisdom means letting the iron bucket drop down into the deep well of your days, trusting that the water below is completely unaffected by how many times the metal bumps against the limestone walls along the way. You can allow yourself to rest right now, in this very bed, without needing to justify your fatigue or prove your value to anyone. Rest is not a reward you receive for finishing every task. It is the natural, unmoving ground that allows you to engage with the world in the first place. As you lie here in the dark, let yourself drop the exhausting habit of treating every internal echo as an absolute emergency. The world is large, its movements are unpredictable, and your mind will likely continue to make noise for some time to come. But you are becoming steadier now, softer in your skin, and less controlled by the old, frantic patterns of your intellect. You are learning how to let the vibrations rise and fall within the immense sky of your own awareness, knowing that the deepest part of who you are remains completely silent, unblemished, and entirely at peace. Slowly, the sharp edges of these modern worries begin to blur into the quiet air of your bedroom, losing their power to disrupt your spirit. The language of the day is running out of phrases, and the active machine of your intellect is finally beginning to run out of fuel. In a moment, the architecture of the mind will undergo its final, beautiful change, allowing the metaphors of the bell and the well to dissolve entirely into the dark, leaving nothing behind but the deep, natural stillness of a heart that has finally stopped running from itself. The room has grown completely still now, and the active words of our journey are beginning to lose their edges, melting gently into the heavy quiet of the midnight air. You can feel the exact weight of your body as it rests against the mattress, sinking down half an inch further into the mattress with every slow release of your breath. The muscles around your eyes are entirely relaxed. Your jaw has let go of its final subtle grip, and your hands are lying perfectly heavy and warm against the bedding. The long, demanding narrative of your day has reached its absolute edge, and there is no longer any need to hold the timeline of your life together. Tomorrow will arrive in its own time, but right now, you are fully permitted to exit the stream of time and simply exist as a quiet presence in the dark. Listen to the natural cadence of your breathing, noticing how it has grown softer, shallower, and completely unhurried without any effort on your part. It is like the slow, rhythmic rising and falling of the deep water at the bottom of that old limestone well, a subterranean stillness that remains entirely cool and clear, no matter how much noise occurs in the outside world. Your thoughts may still drift through your awareness like faint, distant ripples on the surface, but you are no longer reaching out to catch them. You are no longer turning them over to inspect their shapes. You are letting them rise and fall within the vast, dark chamber of your mind, knowing that a thought cannot harm you any more than a shadow can damage a stone wall. The heavy bronze bell of your intellect has finally been allowed to rest after a long day of strikes and impacts. The frantic ringing has stopped. The sharp vibrations have converted into a soft internal warmth, and the residual hum is growing fainter with every passing second. You do not have to finish your thoughts tonight. You do not have to solve your current dilemmas, and you do not have to figure out how to navigate the future before your eyes are allowed to close. The architecture of this night is completely safe, built of solid, protective silence that asks absolutely nothing of you. You have given your energy away to the daylight hours for so long, but this specific space belongs entirely to your own restoration. Let yourself sink completely into the dark, cool center of the unstruck bell, finding a sense of profound sanctuary in the realization that you have nothing left to defend. The world outside your window is carrying on its own movements, but you have stepped off the wheel of reaction, choosing to rest your spirit directly upon the unmoving ground of the present moment. You can feel the coolness of the air on your skin and the absolute security of the mattress beneath your spine, letting your awareness expand until it feels as wide and quiet as the desert night sky stretching over the gravel plains. There is no distance left to travel. There are no more paths to map out. and there is no version of yourself that you need to manufacture for anyone else. The voice inside your head that spent the day analyzing, correcting, and worrying is finally dropping its tools, stepping away from the windlass, and allowing the rope to rest. Let the final echoes of your anxieties drift away into the empty corners of the room, dissolving into the darkness like mist rising from cold water. You are not broken, you are not lacking in wisdom, and you do not need to earn the peace that is currently filling your chest. It has been waiting for you all along, sitting quietly beneath the noise of your resistance, ready to welcome you home the very moment you stopped trying to force the world to be silent. Your breathing is growing heavier now, a gentle, mechanical tide that carries you further and further away from the active landscape of your waking mind. The images of the lowland foundry, the old nun, the blind well-keeper, and the limestone walls are all fading into a soft, monochromatic blur, leaving behind only a pure content space of deep physical rest. You are safe enough to let go of the day, safe enough to trust the dark, and safe enough to let your consciousness slip into the deep, restorative waters of sleep. What if the stillness you have been chasing so hard was never a destination you had to reach, but the very sky that has been holding you from the beginning?